Bonjour à tous and welcome to another episode of À la Une, the series in which we use the news to learn French. So I thought we'd do something a little bit different this time, so rather than watching something, instead we're going to read a news article. Now, in my quest to find a topic a little less political than in previous episodes, I've managed to find a really depressing one, so well done me. So sadly, this video is going to be about a koala which had been saved from the fires in Australia, but has since had to be put down. I know it's sad, but as long as we stick together, remember that we still have each other, and that we're here to learn French, we should be fine. So I've taken this article from 20 Minutes, which is a website that I use an awful lot for teaching. You could of course read the classic newspapers like Le Monde, Libération, Le Figaro, but the problem with those is that they all have some political alignment, so anything you read in those will have an element of opinion. Now that's not a problem per se, but articles like that tend to be written in a slightly more literary style, whereas 20 Minutes articles are taken straight from AFP, so they just present the facts, which I think makes them a little bit more accessible for French learners. Now, since we're reading, we don't have to worry about people speaking too quickly. In fact, we can read as quickly or as slowly as we like. But I still think it's a good idea to do a little bit of preparation beforehand, just to give ourselves a head start. So this is an article about Australia, so of course we need to know the word for Australia, which is Australie. More specifically, it's about a koala, which in French is koala. No points for guessing those two. Fire is also going to be fairly prevalent in this text, so some fire-related vocabulary will also be useful. I imagine you already know that the French word for fire is feu, but when we're talking about a disastrous or uncontrolled fire, we usually use the word incendie. So a fire that you light yourself is indeed a feu, but the fires in Australia are most certainly incendie. You might also see the word flamme, which you can probably guess means flame, and this can be used in much the same way as in English. So for example, you could say he escaped the fire, but you could also say that he escaped the flames. The same is true in French. What do flames do? They burn, which is brûler, and related to that is the word brûlure, which is a burn, like the injury. What do we want to do to fires? Of course, we want to put them out or extinguish them, which is éteindre. As it happens, éteindre is also used for turning things off. So to turn off the light is éteindre la lumière, and to turn off the computer is éteindre l'ordinateur. But in the case of fires, it means to put out or extinguish. Who do you call if you want to éteindre un incendie? The fire brigade, of course, and a firefighter in French is un pompier. Actually, if you go to France and see a firefighter, you will see that their uniform says sapeur-pompier, which is the full official term for a firefighter in France, but in spoken French you can just say pompier. Unfortunately, this article does deal with the topic of death, so you need to be familiar with the verb mourir, meaning to die, and its past participle mort. Mort, by the way, is also a noun, meaning death or dead person. But you're also likely to see some euphemisms used to soften the tone. One common one is trouver la mort, literally to find death, but is basically the equivalent of pass away in English. Another very common one is décédé, which is related to the word deceased in English, but décédé is actually a verb, so il a décédé means he died or he passed away. In the case of fire, or indeed any other disaster, you might also see the verb périr, which predictably means to perish. Finally, we're not just talking about death by fire, but euthanasia. So to euthanize in French is euthanasier. And when we're talking about euthanizing animals, in English we use the term put to sleep. And you can do that in French as well using endormir. You might already know the verb s'endormir, meaning to fall asleep, but if you put something or someone else to sleep, it's not reflexive. So there's some vocabulary that we might come across. We're also likely to see a lot of passive voice as well. I'm not going to explain the passive in detail in this video, I have another video for that, but I will bring it up when it comes up because it is particularly important, especially when you're reading the news. So let's get straight into the article, starting with the headline. Australie. Le koala sauvé des flammes par une femme a été euthanasié. So we've already seen a lot of this vocabulary, which should make it fairly easy to decipher. Australia, the koala saved, sauver means to save, from the flames by a woman has been euthanized. This is a lovely example of the passive voice using the passé composé a été euthanasié, because putting the koala down was something that happened once and is now finished. We then have a short summary just underneath. Le koala, bloqué au milieu des incendies, avait été sauvé par une Australienne qui passait là par hasard. So, the koala, bloqué means blocked or stuck. Au milieu des incendies. Au milieu de means in the middle of and is very common both in written and spoken French. I'm sure you could have guessed that already, but remember that we're here to learn, not just to understand. So if you don't know the expression au milieu de without reading it, you might want to take some time to really learn it. Avait été sauvé. So this is another passive voice, but instead être has been put into the plus que parfait, meaning we're already talking about the past, but now we're talking about an event that happened even earlier. In other words, we're saying had been saved rather than has been saved. Par une Australienne, by an Australian woman. How do I know it's a woman? Because it says Australienne, the feminine form of Australien. And remember that you don't have to say man, woman, or person after a nationality in French, just the adjective is enough. Qui passait là, who was passing there, or perhaps who was passing by. Par hasard, which means by chance. So I would translate that whole sentence as the koala, stuck in the middle of the fire, had been saved by an Australian woman who happened to be passing by. Une semaine après avoir été sauvé in extremis des flammes par une femme en Australie, le koala, surnommé Louis, est mort ce mardi à l'hôpital de Port-Macquarie, où il a été euthanasié, ont annoncé les vétérinaires sur Facebook. So the first thing that you might notice is that this sentence is very long, and that's typical of French journalism. They add extra details in the middle of sentences, and that can sometimes make it difficult to read. However, I promise that the more practice you get, the easier it will become. Thankfully, the writer of this article has taken the liberty of using a lot of commas to make it that little bit easier to follow. So, une semaine, of course, is 1 week. Après avoir été sauvé. This is another passive voice, but this time we're using the infinitive. Après avoir is a very, very common structure, and it basically means after having. In this case, it's after having été sauvé, which we know means been saved. So, after having been saved. In extremis is a Latin phrase meaning at the last minute, or when we're talking about life and death, can mean at the brink of death or death's door. So, a week after being saved from the flames at death's door by a woman in Australia, the koala surnommé Louis. Now, you might see the word surnommé and assume it means surname, but that's a false friend. The noun surnom means nickname, so surnommé means nicknamed. Died this Tuesday at the Port-Macquarie Hospital. I really hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. Où il a été euthanasié, where he was euthanized. So notice that this time I translated that as he was euthanized, even though before I said he has been euthanized. Now, exactly why I did that is not important. This is not a video about translation, but I want to point out the fact that although we use was for the passive voice in English, that doesn't mean that you need to use été or être in the imperfect tense in French. In fact, if you said où il était euthanasié, that would mean he used to be euthanized regularly, which of course is not the case. Basically, literal translations are bad, and you need to think about the meaning of the sentence, not the words themselves. As I said at the start, he was euthanized once, and now it's over. Exactly the two criteria for the passé composé. Ont annoncé les vétérinaires sur Facebook, so announced the veterinarians on Facebook. So notice that in reported speech, we put the past tense verb before the subject. So you don't say les vétérinaires ont annoncé, but ont annoncé les vétérinaires. La semaine dernière, Tony, une Australienne, avait sauvé un koala bloqué au milieu des flammes qui ravagent le pays depuis plusieurs semaines, puis elle l'avait emmené à l'hôpital pour koala de Port-Macquarie où il avait été pris en charge. So la semaine dernière is last week. An Australian woman had saved a koala, plus que parfait again, stuck in the middle of the flames, which have been ravaging the country for several weeks. Now, notice here that we use the present tense in French, even though in English we'd say have been ravaging. That's because, as far as French is concerned, this is a present tense action, since the fires are still burning. And that's the case for anything that has been happening for a certain length of time. In French, we use the present tense. Puis, then, she had taken him to the koala hospital in Port Macquarie. Again, I really hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. What can I say? I'm just a French teacher. We interrupt this broadcast for a brief message from our editor. I would just like to butt in here and say that I don't know what I was smoking when I recorded this, but whatever it was, it made me forget that I'm an English teacher. Like, that's my full-time job. So, yeah, I don't know. I guess what I should have said is, I'm just an idiot. So this word emmener is very interesting. It means to take, in the sense of taking something from one place to another. But in French, the words bring and take depend on the nature of the thing that you're bringing or taking. So emmener contains the word mener, which means to lead. So something that you emmener is something that you can lead in a certain direction. For example, a person or perhaps even a koala. Emporter, on the other hand, contains the word porter, which means to carry. So you usually emporter something small that you can carry. In fact, you might see the expression à emporter in a restaurant, meaning to take away. Bring follows the same rule, amener for people or animals, and apporter for objects. It is true that French speakers mix these up, so don't worry too much about that, but there's a nice brief summary of the rules. Où il avait été pris en charge, where he had been pris en charge, which means taken care of. Also, again, notice the passive voice. Les brûlures ne se seraient pas améliorées. This is a really juicy one. We know that les brûlures is the burns, and then we have ne se serait pas améliorées. So strap yourselves in, it's going to be wild. The verb here is s'améliorer, which means to improve. Now, if I improve something, I just use the verb améliorer, no reflexive pronoun. But if something improves on its own, we use s'améliorer, literally to improve itself. As a reflexive verb, it takes être in the passé composé, and indeed the other compound tenses. This compound tense is the past conditional, would have, and so être is in the conditional third person plural, serait. The past participle améliorer agrees, as it usually does with reflexive verbs, with the subject les brûlures, which is feminine plural, hence the extra es at the end of améliorer. To top it all off, it's negative, so we end up with les brûlures ne se seraient pas améliorées, the burns wouldn't have improved. It's a pretty complex one, but if this is the type of grammar that you need to be studying, it's a really good example of a negative reflexive verb in a compound tense. If all of that is above your level, do not worry, you can keep watching this video and reading this article. If all you've learnt from this is the difference between améliorer and s'améliorer, that is absolutely fine. Le koala, âgé de 14 ans selon les vétérinaires, avait été gravement brûlé au niveau des pattes. Mercredi dernier, l'hôpital avait annoncé que son pronostic vital était engagé. Aujourd'hui, nous avons pris la décision d'endormir Ellenborough Lewis. Nous l'avons placé sous anesthésie générale ce matin pour regarder ses brûlures et changer les bandages, a écrit l'établissement vétérinaire. So, the koala, aged 14 years, selon, according to, the vets, had been gravement brûlé. So grave means bad or serious, so gravement brûlé means seriously burnt. Au niveau des pattes, au niveau de is a really common expression, both in speech and writing, which literally means at the level of, but in this case is probably best translated to when it comes to. Les pattes are paws, so his paws were seriously burnt. Last Wednesday, the hospital had announced that its pronostic vital était engagé. This one isn't that easy to translate, but if someone's pronostic vital is engagé, or sometimes mis en jeu, it means that their injuries are life-threatening. Today we have made the decision. Notice that in French you prendre une décision, not faire une décision, to put down Ellenborough Lewis. We placed him under general anaesthetic this morning to watch or keep an eye on his burns and to change the bandages. There's some really good medical vocabulary in there for anyone interested, so if that's the kind of thing you want to learn, do pay a little bit more attention to that section. A écrit l'établissement vétérinaire. Again, we've switched the subject and the verb for reported speech here, or I suppose really it's reported writing, since they wrote it, they didn't say it. Dans son cas, les brûlures se sont aggravées et malheureusement ne se seraient pas améliorées. L'un des buts de l'hôpital pour koala est le bien-être animal et c'est sur cette base que la décision a été prise. Merci pour votre support sans faille, a-t-il ajouté. In his case, the burns se sont aggravés. They got worse. S'aggraver is to get worse. And unfortunately wouldn't have improved. I don't think I need to talk about that one in any more detail. L'un des buts de l'hôpital, one of the goals of the hospital. So first of all, notice that but means goal and that the T is not silent. But also notice that when you say one of the, in French, you say l'un des or l'une des. You need the L apostrophe there. Is the bien-être animal. Bien-être is well-being, so bien-être animal is animal well-being. And it is on this basis that the decision was made. Lovely past participle agreement there with la décision a été prise. Again, past participles always agree with the subject, in this case la décision, in the passive voice. Merci pour votre support sans faille. Une faille is a fault or a flaw, so support sans faille is faultless or unwavering support. A-t-il ajouté? So remember that with reported speech, we invert the subject and the verb, similar to what you can do with questions. When you invert the pronouns il and elle with avoir, or indeed any other verb that ends with a vowel, you also need to include a T to break up those vowels. A il and a elle just don't sound nice, so the T helps it all to flow better. This is also the case for inverted questions, so if you're familiar with those, then this shouldn't be too difficult. Just remember that you only do this with il and elle and verbs that end with a vowel. Au moins 350 koalas ont péri dans les incendies. So at least 350 koalas have perished in the fires. Au moins is a very useful expression and one that I recommend that you take note of. La faune australienne a également été durement touchée par les incendies, des associations estimant que plusieurs centaines de koalas ont péri. Au moins 350 de ces marsupiaux ont ainsi trouvé la mort dans la seule réserve de Port Macquarie, hypothéquant l'avenir de l'espèce dans cette zone. So, la faune, like the English word fauna, refers to animals in general. I think in English, though, we're more likely to use the word wildlife. So, Australian wildlife has également, equally, or also, été durement touché. So here we have yet another example of the passive voice, but we also have the adverb durement, which comes from the adjective dur, which means hard. But durement doesn't mean hardly, like barely. Instead, it means hard like badly or seriously. So it has also been seriously touché, which could mean touched, but here it means affected by the fires. Some associations estimant, claiming that several hundreds of koalas have perished. At least 350 of these marsupiaux, I imagine you've already guessed that marsupiaux means marsupials, but do take note of the fact that the plural of marsupial is marsupiaux, just like most other words ending with al, for example, animal, animaux, hospital, hospitaux. Ont ainsi trouvé la mort. So there's that expression meaning to pass away, trouver la mort, in the only reserve in Port Macquarie. Hypothéquant l'avenir de cette espèce. Now, the verb hypothéquer usually means to mortgage, but the future of the species in this zone has not been mortgaged. Instead, in this context, it means to put in danger. Finally, Nick Boyle de la Taronga Conservation Society a dit avoir le cœur brisé, non seulement du fait des victimes humaines, mais aussi de la faune sans défense, tuée en Nouvelle-Galles du Sud. La pression sur les populations de koalas était déjà forte, a-t-il dit, en citant la perte d'habitat et les prédateurs. Et voilà ça maintenant. So Nick Boyle of the Taronga Conservation Society, I'll give you that translation for free, said that he had le cœur brisé, he had a broken heart. Brisé actually means to shatter, so that just gives you an idea of how seriously French take their broken hearts. Also, notice the use of dire plus infinitive. In English, you'd have to say, he said that he had a broken heart. But French doesn't really like that repetition, so you can just say, il a dit avoir le cœur brisé. Not only because of the human victims, notice that victime is feminine regardless of the gender of the victime, but also of the faune sans défense, literally wildlife without defense, or perhaps more naturally, defenseless wildlife, killed in New South Wales. The pressure on koala populations was already high, a-t-il dit, there's that reported speech inversion again, en citant, while citing, la perte d'habitat, the loss of habitats, and the predators. Et voilà ça maintenant, and now this, which I think is a really sad ending to the article. He's saying it was already bad, habitats were being lost, predators were disappearing, and now the fires are making it even worse. It really is a terribly sad situation, and before I end, I would like to say to anyone watching in Australia, I hope everything is okay. That is it for this episode of À la Une. I hope you've learnt something from it. Remember that you don't have to memorize everything that I've talked about in this video. That would be pretty impressive, but also not the best idea anyway. Of course, if you have any questions, please do let me know in the comments. Also, let me know what kind of things you want me to talk about in future episodes. But until next time, à bientôt.